Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Welcome back to part 2 of my D&D or Dungeons & Dragons Buyer's Guide series. This is a series of videos with the intention of giving people ideas of what books would be handy to pick up if you're looking to go back and play earlier versions of the Dungeons & Dragons game. In the first video I covered 0th edition, the Menser D&D, 1st and 2nd edition AD&D. It was a long video, probably longer than I had initially intended, but I was missing a lot of the stuff that I wanted to talk about in those videos, so I decided to combine everything together. Going forward, I'm going to split things up a little bit more. So there's going to be, I think, 3 more videos to come after this. So this is part 2, where I left off with 2nd edition. Today I'm going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. And by 3rd edition, I mean what's commonly referred to nowadays as 3.0. This was the version of the game that ran between 2000 and 2003, so it had a relatively short lifespan, so there was still a fair amount of stuff put out. And what I want to do today is just talk about some of the things that I think would be worth to pick up, including a few books that I unfortunately don't have in my collection, but I will talk about them nonetheless, as well as at the end I want to talk about some books that you can probably end up avoiding if you wanted to, or it was probably for the best to avoid them. So anyway, without further ado, we'll go over and we'll start looking at some books that I think would make worthwhile purchases if you want to play Dungeons & Dragons 3.0. So as with the other editions, the first thing I want to show off are just the 3 core rule books. As you can see here, the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual. So these are the bare essentials, and again, if you're looking to just run the bare minimum, then this is something that you could definitely pick up just as these 3. Now with the Player's Handbook in particular, what's interesting about this is there were 2 different versions that were released. So this here, what I have, is the very first printing, and it's actually kind of neat because if you only want to run like a single small adventure for like 1st through 3rd level characters, the back of the original first printing, which came out in 2000, includes the year 2000 survival kit. And what this is a miniature Dungeon Master's Guide, which gives out things like, experience, and I think there's some treasure at the end, but it also includes some monsters. So including a mature adult red dragon, gelatinous cube, ghoul, ghast, goblin, hellhound, orc, skeleton, and I think there's ogres in here. Oh, sorry, that's an ogre, not an orc. They use that as the orc artwork actually in the Monster Manual, but this is the ogre stat block. And then they just have a few more just as basic stat blocks that don't have the accompanying artwork. So that's pretty cool, as well as some treasure. And just some steps for creating a dungeon. So again, if you want to do sort of like the bare minimum, you can just get, if you can get a first printing of the 3rd edition Player's Handbook, then you have a miniature Dungeon Master's Guide and Monster Manual built right in. So you could go basically just using that one book. Now it also included a character generator CD. This is just a demo version. I don't know if they ever actually released the full version. I honestly can't remember. I don't remember seeing it, but I wasn't really into collecting them back at that point in time. But there's the character generator disc in there. Now the 2nd and 3rd printings of the Player's Handbook, because each year I think they did a new print run. The 2nd and 3rd printing, in the back, instead of having the survival kit, what it has is some articles from Dragon Magazine, particularly the Sage Advice ones, that answer some questions about some of the rules and things that people may have been having issues with. So if you get one of the later versions, I don't have one of those. I actually would love to get a copy of the 3rd edition Player's Handbook that has that in there, simply just to add it to my collection, because the 2 copies that I have, I think, are both first printing, so they both have the survival kit in there. So that's the Player's Handbook, and the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manuals are both actually fairly thinner than the Player's Handbook, and they just include, the Dungeon Master Guide just basically has some treasures, building encounters, adventures, the stuff that you would find in there normally, and then of course you've got your classic Monster Manual with the, just show off a couple of the things here. So the artwork's actually pretty decent. throughout most of these, and these are the core books. So we'll just set those aside. However, if you're looking for more than just the core rule books, there are a few things that you can pick up. So let's just say you want some adventures, you want some pre-written stuff because you just kind of want to jump in and be able to play. If you can find a copy of the original D&D adventure game, this is sort of like the starter set for 3rd edition. And I'm not going to go over all the contents, but it has sort of a miniature rule book, but it also has some adventures. And there's, I think, 5 different adventures in this book. It all comes using the one map that's included. You just use different sections of it. So you can get quite a bit of play out of this. There's quite a few different adventures that you can actually run through this. And it also comes with even some pre-generated characters if you wanted to go that route as well. So again, if you're looking for just something that you can kind of drop in and start playing, the adventure game is a pretty good way to go. Now, in addition, Wizards of the Coast did release a series of adventures, modules if you want to call them that, when 3rd edition first came out. It started with the Sunless Citadel, and then there was Forge of Fury, and there was quite a few different ones. I don't have very many of them. In fact, I only have one, which I managed to pick up. This is Heart of Nightfang Spire. And this is an adventure for 10th level characters. I believe the series, I think there were 10 or 12 of these modules. And I think if I recall correctly, they went all the way up to 20th level. So you could play basically a full campaign, character progression wise, if you end up picking these up. And if you're interested and you just want to read the Sunless Citadel and Forge of Fury, which were the first 2 to be released, they were reprinted in 2017's Tales from the Yawning Portal for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. So the stats aren't quite the same, but if you just want the adventures, they're in that book as well. Now, another great couple of books that are sort of utilitarian that I think would be really worth picking up. The first one is the Hero Builder's Guidebook. Now this is really aimed at first-time or rookie players to 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons. Now 3rd edition was a big change from what was presented in the earlier versions of the game. So the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons series, they actually changed quite a few different things. So this was a great book to learn the new edition, it goes over the races and the classes and all that stuff. But what's really great, and the reason that I went out and actually bought this book when I finally got the chance to, isn't for any of the information contained in here. Although again, if you're a first-time player, then that's really something that could come in super handy. The reason that I got it is just for the section in the back here where you've got a few pages of just names. Now, I'm terrible with names. I'm awful at trying to come up with names, especially fantasy-sounding names. So this section here, these last 2 pages, have gotten so much use in my campaigns that it's not even funny. So if you get a chance to pick this up, it's usually relatively cheap. And again, if you're really bad at names, those last 2 pages are perfect. But if you've never played 3rd edition, or if you're new to D&D and you've heard a lot of people talk about 3rd edition, you want to find a way to kind of get into it, this is a useful resource. Now, another great book is the Arms and Equipment Guide. This is actually one of the few, if only, probably the only hardcover book that they released that was still black and white, which is kind of weird. Now, 3rd edition had a lot of black and white books to cut down on production costs. But what this book has here is just really, like it says, arms and equipment. It's a whole new list of equipment, magic items, mundane items, but it also has things like companions and pets, hirelings. There's a lot of really great information in here that if you want to run a 3rd edition campaign, then you can do really well by picking one of these things up. So this is actually, again, a really great book. Now, in addition to that, there were other softcover books that were put out that I think are really worthwhile picking up if you can. The reason that I don't have them is I don't necessarily plan on ever running 3.0 again. But there are some other class-based resource books that you may want to pick up. There are books like Tome and Blood for sorcerers and wizards, Song and Silence for rogues and bards, Masters of the Wild for I think it was druids and rangers and I think barbarians as well. And then there was sword and fist for fighters and monks. And I'm forgetting Defenders of the Faith. There we go. So Defenders of the Faith was clerics and paladins. So these were a series of 5 books. They were soft cover like this, but they have a lot of great information in there for the various classes, as well as some prestige classes, which were something that was a new concept introduced in 3rd edition, or at least implemented differently than what you had with 2nd edition AD&D, which I think had kits. So those books are really great. I know that Tome and Blood, I guess, has a whole section on how to use familiars, which is something that is kind of iffy or questionable as it's presented just in the Player's Handbook. So that's a really great one to pick up as well, or those ones if you're looking to have a few different options for your classes. Like I said, unfortunately, I don't have any of those, but they come in a soft cover, basically like this, you know, with the frame around the pictures. So again, if you get a chance to pick them up, and you're looking to run 3.0, highly recommend them. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about, there were a couple of monster books that were put out. I'm going to discuss one later in the not-so-great section of the video, but one that I think is really cool is the Fiend Folio. So this came out, and this came out near the end of 3.0's, or the original 3rd edition's lifespan, but there's some great stuff in here. It has essentially things like, there's some templates, new templates that were added that were really great, like the half illithid, which goes into like the mind flayers. Here we go. So you got like the half illithid, and it goes through basically the mind flayer breeding cycle to explain how creatures like this can exist. But it is a really cool template. There's also like things like half troll, Hukivas, which were like undead priests or clerics, which I always really like the idea of. It's kind of a counterpoint to the lich, although it's more detrimental to them than, you know, being a lich is, but it's still a cool type of undead. And they just have, like I said, some really great monsters in here. So this is the monster supplement that I really recommend you pick up if you're looking to have a few more options for your 3.0 campaign. Speaking of campaigns, 3rd edition did have a few different settings that they released. So you can pick up a few of the books for them. The first one that I would recommend is the Dungeons & Dragons Gazetteer, which details basically the world of Grayhawk. Grayhawk was the default setting for 3rd edition, which I believe was the first one to really expand on its default settings. So we have the Gazetteer here. Now this is pretty thin. Like it's really thin, so you don't get a lot of information, but it gives you some stuff to work off of, which is fine. Like I said, you can usually find these for relatively cheap. Now it does come with a map inside, so you want to make sure that you're getting that map as well. Otherwise, hopefully they'll cut you a deal so you can pay quite a bit less, because that map is, you know, really important to it. So you can get that. Again, it's pretty thin. Details things very briefly, but if you're looking for a little bit more information, then there's always the Living Grayhawk Gazetteer. Now this was one of my holy grail items that I just recently got a chance to pick up. This was put out for the Role Playing Game Association, so the RPGA, which is their organized play. Back in the early 3rd edition days, they had what was called Living Grayhawk, which was their organized play system and settings. So this goes over a lot more information and goes into a lot more detail, and it's a really great companion to the Dungeons & Dragons Gazetteer. So for example, I don't have the map that came with this, it wasn't in there, but it's the same world that's in here, so I have the Grayhawk map from here. These two go together really well. Another campaign setting that was put out, and I believe it was one of the first ones that was published by Wizards of the Coast, is Kingdoms of Calamar. So this is actually put out by Kenzer and Company, and if they sound familiar, if you've ever read the Knights of the Dinner Table comics, they're the ones that put that out, and if you haven't read Knights of the Dinner Table, you really should, because this is a really great setting as well. So it just goes over basically the world, and it's really cool. Again, you know, I'm really glad to have this. It's weird is that it's sort of a black and white and color hybrid book. So there are sections that are completely in black and white, and then there are other sections that actually have color to them, which is weird. Especially along the borders. I wonder if it's, yeah. So that's kind of a weird way that they did it. There are several maps included in this book, so you want to make sure that they're in there. I've pulled, I think, all of them out, and I have them in my separate map folder. But you've also got things like a hex grid, and it's actually transparent, which is kind of cool. And this does tear out. I didn't tear it out. The maps that were included were actually stuck on with like a little glue strip that you can pull off. So that's that one. There are also a series of supplements released for it as well, in those same style of like the soft covers. Another campaign setting that came out right near the end of 3.0 is Dragonlance. So this is one of the earliest Dungeons & Dragons settings, had a book way back in 1st edition AD&D, and this continues on. So this is a pretty great book if you want to run something in the Dragonlance world. There were other Dragonlance supplements put out as well. This is the only book that was actually published by Wizards of the Coast. After they put out this book, they actually released the rights to publish to a company, I think it was called Mongoose Publishing, and they did all of the supplements. But this is a pretty cool campaign setting, and if you like the Dragonlance novels and you want to run some games in that world, this is a great one to pick up as well. Now, I can't talk about 3rd edition campaign settings without discussing the Forgotten Realms. So, this setting is absolutely fantastic. It's amazing. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in this video about the Forgotten Realms setting, simply because once this is done, I actually want to do a buyer's guide for the 3rd edition Forgotten Realms, or probably just Forgotten Realms in general, as well as I want to do one later on for Eberron. But there's some really great information in here, a really comprehensive guide to the Forgotten Realms setting. Just so much like awesome stuff in here. So this is a really great one to pick up as well. This one I think is one of the more expensive ones to find nowadays, just because of how popular the Forgotten Realms, or how used the Forgotten Realms is, I should say, now in D&D 5th edition. And with no actual 5th edition setting being released, I think there have been some people that have tried to go back and find this book. So it's probably going to be a little more on the pricey side than perhaps the other two. But if you're looking to get, a Forgotten Realms campaign setting, this one is absolutely awesome. So that's it for the books that I have that I recommend. There are a few books that I want to talk about that I really don't recommend, or I would suggest avoiding. So what we'll do is we'll discuss those next. Alright, so I already talked about books that I think you really should pick up, or at least look at if you're considering running 3.0 or the original version of 3rd edition. But there are also some books to avoid. There's not a lot that I really want to discuss, but there are a few that I just really don't think are worth your time or the money, especially some of the ones that I've seen in used stores and the price that they were charging for them. The first one I want to talk about is the one that I don't have, and that is the Psionics Handbook. So I know Psionics has always been a big part of the Dungeons & Dragons game, but the Psionics Handbook, as printed for 3.0, is absolutely atrocious. And it's terrible for a few different reasons. Number one, to make your character actually be useful, you have to have good stats for like multiple abilities. So you don't just use like your intelligence like a wizard does. You don't just use wisdom like a cleric, or charisma like a sorcerer. I believe in a lot of cases your random numerical effects, or things that add to like damage, for example, are based off of one ability score, where your DCs are based off of another, or your bonus points that you get for your sonic powers are even sometimes a third ability score on top of that. So it can be really hard to make an effective character like that. The other issue is that your sonic powers don't scale as you go up in level. So you end up, I think you can drop earlier versions of powers for later ones, but you get to the point where your low-level ones, your cheapest ones, and the ones you could use the most are not very good. They just don't get any better. And the ones that you can actually use that are decent cost so much that you use fewer things throughout the day. So I would recommend staying away from the Psionics Handbook altogether, at least for 3.0. So that's the one that I would say to look out for. I did recently see one that was it was a used copy, and it was selling for $40, which is just way too much considering that that book just really isn't very good. Another one that I want to talk about is Savage Species. So this is a book for playing monstrous characters, and it just isn't really balanced or fun or really very good, unfortunately. It's just, you have too much. They try to break it down so that the classes, the racial classes, work similar to how a regular character class does, and that you would have to, for example, go through your entire progression of the monster classes without being able to gain a single level of another class. Now, what's rough about this is that a lot of times you're just not going to be very good, and you're not going to be as good as similarly leveled characters from just the standard races and classes. I mean, if you look at, say, the Arania, which is like a shape-shifting spider type of thing, by the time you're 7th level, you only have 3 hit dice. So you're very easy to kill, and I don't see much in terms of like getting natural armor bonuses or anything else. So there we go, we get +1 natural armor, and alternate form, and that's the only thing you get, is just an extra +1 armor class. So you're going to be very fragile, and a lot of the classes are just, again, very similar to that. Now, again, if you want to play an Astral Deva, you only get up to 12 hit dice, and you're just not going to be as effective as other characters. So the intention behind it was interesting, and for some of the smaller versions, smaller level adjustment races, it may not be that bad, but it just didn't really work, I think, the way that they wanted it to. It just didn't quite come across the way that I wanted to. It's not fun to play any of these races. Maybe at first level, because at first level you're a little bit more powerful, but by the time you get to 2nd level, you just kind of suck. So I'm going to be honest, this is one that you can definitely avoid picking up. Another one that I would caution against is the Deities and Demigods book. For the reason is that, I bought this because I wanted to read up information on the different gods. And I had the Forgotten Realms equivalent to this book that had come out for 3rd edition as well. And that one was really good. I mean, it had enough background information on the gods that you could do some stuff with. And this is basically just flat out their statistics, and really nothing else. Like, you don't get any real information, just like a description of what they look like. And it's just not that great. Like, to me, it was really kind of disappointing, because I don't really care about the stats as much as just the backgrounds. And, getting the background for someone like Vecno, I thought would have been awesome to have a write-up on him, but it just wasn't in there. So that really kind of sucks. Now, the Living Grayhawk Gazetteer that I showed earlier has much better information for the gods than Deities and Demigods. So if you're looking for the flavor, I'd recommend trying to find that over that particular book. And the last one that I want to discuss is the Epic Level Handbook. So what this is it's guidelines for taking your characters beyond 20th level. And it's just, 3rd edition, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, but 3rd edition had its fair share of balance issues, and this book just makes it really even worse. So for example, I think you don't gain hit dice, if I recall correctly. Oh no, sorry, you still gain hit die, but there's just a lot of other stuff that you don't gain, and a lot of the abilities that you get, or a lot of the feats that you can choose from, because that's one of the big things about the Epic Level Handbook. So most of the feats that you get are pretty broken, and the biggest thing that makes them epic in a lot of cases is just the fact that you can keep taking them and they keep stacking. But the reason that I really recommend against this is it's really difficult to make adventures for such a high level of play. It's hard to make them where they're, fun, or where you can really do more than just combat situations. And it's just, a lot of these things are, again, just poorly balanced. And when you get into the section with monsters, for example, it just gets a little bit ludicrous, a little bit ridiculous. Because you've got dragons that, see if I can find one here. Well, first of all, you've got, something like this, the Hecachondrites, which gets, 100 attacks a round, which is just ridiculous. They may not necessarily get them all off, but it's just, absolutely insane to go up against something like that. But then you also get something like, if I can find them here, maybe that's all because it's in the, alright, here we go. So for example, you've got epic dragons. So the Force Dragon has essentially, I believe, the Wormling version of the Force Dragon has a higher challenge rating than the... What do we got here? Okay, the Wormling's not so bad. But you've got some of these that even the earliest versions or the youngest versions of them are more powerful than some of like the Great Worm Dragons that are out there. So I mean, by the time it reaches juvenile stage, it's already got a challenge rating of 23, which I believe is higher than the Red Dragon Great Worm. So it's just, again, it's just really over the top, ludicrously, you know, overpowered. And again, the monsters get so out of hand that it's just going to be, you know, it's not going to make for a fun time. And when it comes to epic level spell casting, instead of just having like level 10 spells, 11, 12, or something like that that you can keep in line with the regular spell system beforehand, they have this convoluted way of designing epic spells, and it involves a lot of, it's just not user friendly. It doesn't look like it's fun to work out. It involves like having seeds of things that you can combine together, and you have to, like, these formulas that you have to work out. It's just not fun. And if you're looking just to have a fun experience with 3rd edition, I honestly say recommend that you stay as far away from this book as you can, because it's just going to be sort of like a frustrating nightmare for a dungeon master to try to come up with stuff that can challenge the players without outright obliterating them. So anyway, those are my thoughts on some books that you should avoid. So that's, you know, again, there's not very many of them, but those are ones that I would recommend staying away from, in addition to the ones that I think would make for great buys. Alright, so that was my buyer's guide for D&D 3rd edition or D&D 3.0. So again, this is just for the version of the game that came out between 2000 and 2003. So I hope you found the suggestions helpful if you're looking to actually go back and play this version of the game. If you're wondering though if you really should go back and play 3.0, then I gotta be honest, I would say probably no. I don't highly recommend this version of the game. It can be fun, especially at lower levels it's not so bad, but there's a few things that you need to be aware of when you start to run something like this. One of the big things is some of the classes are just not fun at all and have nothing to them that makes them worth playing beyond 1st or 2nd level. And those are classes like the Ranger and the Paladin. They're just not very well designed. Other than that, the rules are a bit convoluted. Things like attacks of opportunity aren't necessarily as clear as they probably should be. I mean, they have charts for different types of actions to let you know if it can provoke an attack of opportunity, and a lot of times what you end up seeing in those charts, if I can find one here really quickly, I'm not going to waste too much time on it, but basically, so here we go. I don't know how well it's going to show up. I probably should have done this in the other section here, but you've got charts that show attacks of opportunity. You've got, you know, yes, no, varies, usually, and maybe listed in there. So it's not as well thought out, I think, as it could have been. Really, this is a version that if you do play, I would recommend staying probably between 3rd and 8th or 9th level. That seems to be the butter zone, or the Goldilocks zone, if you will, for how well it plays, and it can be a lot of fun there. Like I said, just keep in mind that if you're someone who likes classes, like my favorite class is the Ranger, and the Ranger's horrible in this book. I mean, one of the stupid things that they give them is proficiency in medium armor and shields, but they lose their abilities that they gain, like the 2-weapon fighting and other stuff, if they wear medium armor or use a shield. So it's just really made of, like, there's full of weird decisions in here. And overall, if you go beyond really 10th level or so, it's going to start to get to the point where it gets really painful and ridiculous in terms of what the player characters can do. I mean, I remember running one encounter I had spent probably about 2 hours on, designing the NPCs, writing kind of like the setup and the tactics and everything, and I was really happy with the way that I had developed this encounter, only to have a player drop the spell Creeping Doom on top of them. These were all humanoid NPCs, so it was 1,000 points of damage that was just dropped immediately on them and destroyed the whole thing. And there's other stories along these lines, too, of encounters that I took a long time to design that were defeated by poorly planned out spells. So pursue this one at your own risk. The fortunate thing is that if you do try to go back for 3.0, you're likely going to find that it's probably cheaper to collect than 3.5, which came out after it. So that could be a consideration as well. And again, if you just want to do something really fun, really quick, try to get a first printing player's handbook with the Dungeon Master Guide and little mini monster manual in there, because you can use just that one book to actually design and run a few low-level adventures. That could be a lot of fun. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative, and I hope you come back for the next installment where I do my Buyer's Guide for Dungeons & Dragons version 3.5. Thanks a lot.